When a unique orphan with magical powers befriends a boy from a loving family, he wants to reveal his greatest secret and be accepted as part of his own. Shortly after, a tragic accident makes his dream come true, but it is far from what he imagined. One carnival night, a man asked to buy cotton candy from a stall. He said he was about to close, but the bewildered seller complied with the pleas of petitioners who watched in awe as the sugar confectionery turned. After eating cotton candy, the young man sneaks into the orphanage, strips off his clothes to expose the children's pajamas, silently returns to bed, and transforms into a boy named Simon. A short while later, the orphanage director, Madame Gautron, greeted the driver and announced that the children were ready for the city. While the orphans goof around the house, Simon straightens his shirt and hopes to be adopted soon. But the bully Kevin called Simon ugly, so the educator scolded him. Later that day, at a town festival, a tutor watches as the children rush to board a ship at anchor. Simon separates himself from the others and climbs into the engine room to hide. Unexpectedly, a girl named Madeline watches from the other side as her brother, Thomas, sneaks in through the hatch and picks up a cake and a bottle of wine. Thomas sees Simon looking at her and invites her to dinner with him. After a glass of wine, Simon reveals that he was left in an orphanage as a baby. Thomas sympathizes with the orphan's miserable life and claims he has a potato allergy and cannot eat French fries. Much later, Simon steals a plate of bread and hides under the table to dine with his new friends. The trio then overhear the siblings' parents looking for them. Suddenly a strong hand grabbed Madeline from her hiding place, and Thomas also tried to run after her. Simon watches in desperation as his friends laugh with his father, Jacques, and his mother, Agnès Durand, as they wish for a family of their own. A few days later, Madame Gautron calls Simon to tell him that Jack's son wants to invite him over for the weekend. The orphan accepted the invitation enthusiastically and happily returned to his room. When the weekend arrives, Jack picks up Simon and drives him to her house. There Thomas gladly welcomes him. The delighted orphan then helps set the table and joins the family dinner. Later that night, Simon peeped through Madeline's door to watch Agnès help her put on a nasal cannula to help her daughter breathe. Seeing the beautiful sight, the lonely orphan quietly returns to Thomas' room. The boy enthusiastically shows Simon the astronaut book, but both of his loving parents fall asleep. But rowdy couples turn on flashlights in the dark to keep the fun going. The next day, when Jack entered the dining room with Thomas' birthday cake, the celebrators quickly blew out the candles. Laughing, Simon and Madeline also blow fire, and Jack tries to light it again. After playing a charade, the boys have a pillow fight with Jack, after which Madeline gives his heaviest pillow to Simon and helps him attack his father. Later that night, Thomas smuggles a pocketknife into the fort he built in his room. He asked Simon if he wanted to be her blood brother for the rest of his life, and said that they must mix their blood and uncover each other's greatest secrets. Simon affirms that he is determined to become part of his family. Thomas then cuts his palm and splatters his blood onto a glass ashtray, followed by Madeline and Simon. After making a pact and bandaging the wound, Thomas reveals that he has seen his mother naked and reveals her secret. There, Madeline insists that she has no friends, but her brother protests. Prompted to uncover an unexplainable truth, Madeline says that according to her parents she will only live 20 years. As her boys stare at her in silence, she urges Simon to reveal her secret. Simon makes his reluctant friends swear to continue the brotherhood, despite a strange secret, the two affirm. Simon then magically transforms into another boy before turning around, much to the shock of the brothers. At Thomas' behest, Simon returns in the form of another boy, though he can clearly imitate the appearance of anyone he has once touched. He then reveals that his scars have disappeared after the transformation, and wonders if he is immortal as suggested by Thomas. Despite this, Madeline says that Simon must save the scar to prove he is his blood brother. After entertaining his friends with his powers, the trio return to bed. Late at night, Simon hears heavy breathing from Madeline's room. As he entered, he saw the girl breathing calmly. Interested in her pain, Simon takes Madeline's hand and transforms into her. Suddenly he felt the same pain in his chest and gasped. Madeline tells her to wait patiently until it's over, so Simon comes to his senses and understands the pain they share. The next day, Madeline brings Simon a pink raincoat her mother bought her. As she sat in awkward silence, the girl suddenly kissed him on the cheek. Then Thomas came in and was irritated by the matching color of the raincoat. As the two boys go into the woods, Thomas gives Simon a pocketknife to find a way out of the orphanage. After setting up a fork on the road to serve as the starting point, Thomas triumphantly starts the race. Due to his short stature, Simon falls behind and transforms into an athletic man to pass Thomas. As they continue running, Thomas tells Simon to stop, but he accidentally slips and falls into a deep ravine. Hearing his friend's screams, Simon trips over a cliff while looking for him. That night, Jack and the search party pursue the two boys through the woods. Simon hears the group calling names and realizes they are primarily looking for Thomas. Meanwhile, Agnes comforts her daughter at her home and worries about the missing boys. Seeing the dejected family outside the window, Simon nervously decides to return as Thomas and retie the wounds of the Lost Blood Covenant. Shortly after, Agnes opens the door for Thomas, who reluctantly returns an unfamiliar hug. A little later, Madeline sees what she believes to be his brother being questioned by the police. The false Thomas tells of the incident and worries Mrs. Gautran, who asks where Simon was last seen. Simon said he was worried that Thomas' body would be found and that he got lost and thought it was his fault that his friend was gone, so he left it alone. Later that night, Simon enters the new room and Madeline follows him. A suspicious girl asks if he really is Thomas, and after examining the stabbing, she is convinced that Simon is gone. Shortly after the ill-fated search, the Durant family and orphanage staff gather around Simon's empty grave, and Madeline breaks down in tears remembering her lost love and her childhood. Years later, Dr. Bate advised her elder Madeline what not to eat, but Madeline did not listen to her. Concerned doctors said he had to take care of his health as he had a long patient list before he had a heart transplant. Frustrated by her persistent illness, Madeline leaves her hospital in tears. While Jack was cleaning his car in front of the mirror shop, a young woman came to pick up her order, asking specifically for Thomas. When the much older Thomas hands her client a package, she asks about her vacation plans, but the shy younger Thomas insists on keeping her job. On Thomas' birthday, Durant's family and friends gather to open presents for the celebrators. Afterwards, Jack gave his son gifts, including a shop panel with the couple's names on it, and revealed that he would hand over the shop to his son. Outside, Thomas looks down at the scar on his palm and thinks desperately about the shop left behind by the real Thomas. Suddenly Madeline arrives with her boyfriend on a motorcycle. Madeline sees her lonely brother and approaches him, and she learns that her father has already revealed the plan. When the young man claims that he doesn't know what he wants, Madeline hugs him out of sympathy. That night, Jack invites guests to tease a photo of a priest, a tradition in his family. While proud parents talk about the photos they scanned in slides his show, an image of young Simon flashes on the screen, startling them. Later that night, Thomas sees himself reflected in his room and transforms into his true face as an adult Simon for the first time. Strolling around town, Thomas saw a telescope on display in a store and eagerly entered the store to take a peek. But he stopped when he spotted a blonde woman inside. Reluctant to talk to her girlfriend, Simon took a stand and bought a telescope to keep her lady from noticing. Simon then eagerly buys French fries while missing their taste under the guise of a man with a potato allergy. Unexpectedly, the young man saw Madeline staring at him through the window and recognized his face. So Simon nervously looks away from her, hoping she won't recognize him. Returning home as Thomas, Simon hurries to change his shirt just as Madeline knocks on her room. The young woman insisted that her childhood friend was still alive, she insisted, and she showed Thomas a photo of Simon stolen in a cafe on her mobile phone. False Thomas, who could not see the photo, dismissed Madeline's claim and said Simon was dead. Not knowing that she is talking to the real Simon, Madeline leaves annoyed. The next day, Simon sees a missing person poster with Madeline's photo handing out similar flyers to passers-by. Simon devises a way to stop Madeline and buys her new clothes while reverting to her original form. Simon enters the spotted cafe on purpose and discovers Madeline secretly waiting for him. After getting the lady's attention, Simon takes her place. As expected, Madeline approaches him and asks if he is Simon. However, Simon coolly denies this, but she claims that the young woman does not believe him and that her cautiousness makes him sad. Her stunned Madeline apologized and turned her away. She suddenly has trouble breathing and her worried Simon takes her outside to get some air. When Madeline asks for the young man's name after he has calmed down, Simon claims his name is Michelle. Later, the waitress hands Michelle some fries and offers Madeline to help, but she refuses. She is annoyed by Michelle's indifference to Madeline's problems, so while eating her French fries, she insists that Michelle is just her indifference. Michelle looked at Madeline's face and said she was beautiful. In her awkward silence, Madeline receives a text message from her parents. At the same time, Michelle also receives it and writes her a short reply. The woman wrote her number on a paper plate before leaving to indicate that she was also interested. At dinner, Thomas watches as Madeline, unaware that he is in the same room, expects a text message from Michelle. To hide his identity, Thomas buys another mobile phone for Michelle. The two soon end up on a date on the beach, where Madeline shows him a secret hiding place in a nearby cave. Michelle falls in love with a beautiful woman and kisses her, and Madeline responds passionately. On their second date, Madeline takes Michelle through the woods to her house and takes her to her room. Finding her lover unusually silent because of her own intentions, Madeline proclaims her life expectancy and kisses him to spend her intimate afternoon. Michelle then hears of the Durant family's arrival and she quickly dresses up and leaves, but Madeline insists she introduce him. Downstairs, Jacques and Agnès greet Michelle, not knowing he is the same person they have lived with for many years. However, the young man looked into Jack's eyes and Jack seemed to recognize his face. One night, while lying around a campfire in the woods, Madeline confesses to Thomas that she has a crush on Michelle. She emotionally admits that she wants to live long beyond her illness, but Thomas stares at her emotionally. Later, Madeline realized that Thomas was looking at her the same way Michelle was, so she got up and went back to bed. The next day, Madeline rummages through her brother's belongings and she looks for the same shirt Michelle is wearing on the missing poster. Michelle calls the cafe and she waits for Madeline, who looks at her suspiciously from a distance. When she doesn't show up, Michelle goes to retrieve Thomas' clothes from a backpack he hid in the woods. Unbeknownst to Simon, Madeline witnesses his change from Michelle to Thomas, confirming her worst fears. Shortly after, Madeline confronts Thomas in Thomas' room. She tells him she knows his secret, and calls him Simon. A despairing Simon stops her outbursts and transforms into her true self, while Madeline lets out her screams of pain. As her wounded woman recovers, she asks for the whereabouts of her real brother. Simon takes Madeline to the deep ravine where Thomas died and challenges him to reveal the truth to his parents. Simon, however, offers to flee rather than torment Jacques and Agnès with his deception. Furious, Madeline calls him a coward, says his parents don't care about him, and vows to find another way to reveal his powers. As Madeline leaves, Simon tearfully confesses his love for her. At Madeline's request, the police, led by Inspector Leroy, surround the valley and retrieve the body of the dead boy. The officer then questions Thomas in the office, shows him a picture of the raincoat, and asks him about Simon. The boy's remains were recovered, and the urn was placed in Simon's once empty grave. When Madeline found out that her brother was inside her, she quietly cried and glared at Thomas, who apologized and hurried home. Believing he has no choice but to flee, Thomas packs his things and is about to leave when the Durants return. Mr. Thomas claims he suffocated in his home, and a worried Jack and Agnès try to talk to Mr. Thomas. Suddenly, Madeline points her shotgun at Thomas and shoots at the ceiling to warn Jack of her own relentlessness. In her despair, she blackmails Thomas into revealing her true self. But as soon as the young man takes a step forward, Madeline shoots him in the stomach and Jack snatches the shotgun from her daughter. While Agnès calls for an ambulance, Madeline transforms into Thomas and screams for help from her fatal wound. Thomas claims to be distressed and sad, and tells the Durant family he loves them when he returns as Simon. As Jacques and Agnès walk away from the stranger in shock, Madeline explains that Simon took the place of the previously buried Thomas. As Simon tries to leave, Jack accuses him of pushing his son away. Offended by him, Simon denies and calls him his father, but then Jack angrily drives him away. Eventually, when the police arrive, Jack strangles Simon outside crying. To escape, Simon transforms into Thomas and surprises Jack and onlookers when he sees an opportunity. Inspector Leroy tries to stop the young man, but he quickly drives off in his patrol car and Madeline collapses in pain. Shortly after, Simon was caught by police in the city and fled on foot. As he approached the crowd, Leroy saw a bloody shirt on the ground, suggesting that the fugitive had turned into a different face. A month later, Madeline looked back at the police who had been watching her from a distance and wondered if Simon was following her. Suddenly Madeline found an old man looking sadly at her. Realizing that he is Simon, she approaches him, but Agnès calls her back. Returning to her mother, Madeline drops her wand and runs in her former body to her lover, kissing him longingly and expressing her love for whoever he may be. I confess Madeline is wary that her police are watching her, and she tells Simon to take her with her while she escapes. However, Madeline falls behind her and falls to the ground as her health deteriorates. As Agnès catches up, Simon, unable to carry Madeline in her body, transforms into Jack in front of her crowd and runs to her car. Arriving at the hospital, Dr. Badet rushes Madeline to the emergency room. Not long after, Director Leroy's squad flock to the building looking for Simon, demanding that everyone be identified. As Simon waits for news, the real Jack arrives and briefs Agnès about the police. At the same time, the young man has turned into an old man, and Agnès tells her husband that Simon has helped him, insisting that she must give priority to Madeline. Dr. Budette returns and tells the Durants that Madeline needs immediate surgery, but she is still scheduled for a transplant. Unfortunately, Jack's heart is not suited for his daughter, so the doctor advises Simon to say goodbye while he tears quietly. Shortly after, Simon sees police officers approaching and walks off, putting on a doctor's face. He then steals drugs in the storage room and puts on his coat. When Officer Dennis hails Simon to confirm his identity, the real doctor sees him and he runs away. As Dennis searches for Simon, Inspector Leroy shows up and demands a stamp. Denise becomes suspicious of the woman, notices Simon in front of her, and radios the real Leroy. However, the prisoner stuns the police officer, transforms into Dennis, and steals her belongings. Simon, wearing Leroy's face, approaches the guard outside Madeline's room and allows her to enter. She tells Jacques and Agnès that all exits are safe, meaning there is no escape, and she asks for time alone with Madeline. Realizing that she is Simon, Agnès and Jacques leave the room and are able to reunite with her dying daughter. Shortly after, the guards stand in shock in front of the real Leroy. When the police burst into the room, they saw Simon dead on the bed with Madeline in his arms. Leroy realizes that Simon killed himself with drugs and finds a note in his hand asking him to save Madeline. To fulfill his last request, Simon and Madeline's bodies are ready for a heart transplant. Shortly after, the Durants mourned in the cemetery, where they legally place the two boys' urns under their respective names, officially naming them Simon Durant. As the media reports on her controversial family, Madeline escapes and lives a second life with her lover's heart. End. Conclusion. In the end, the intricate web of identities and secrets comes full circle, weaving a tale of love, sacrifice, and magical connections. Simon's unique abilities brought him into the lives of the Durants and the orphanage, forging deep bonds and unveiling the complexity of human relationships. The story leaves us with a bittersweet reminder that love and transformation, both literal and metaphorical, shape the paths we take, even as they remain hidden in the folds of time and memory. Thanks again from Movies Recapped. If you enjoyed this movie recap, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more captivating narratives and engaging content. Please also comment on your thoughts and so I know you subscribed and I will reply back to you.